the chair here. Apologies. Councillor Moss is not here, and substitute is Councillor Mann, and Councillor Coos and substitute Councillor thank you.
Councillor Osborne also sends his apologies.
I had an email from Dave Parsons
Yes.
as well.
There was some discussion that he was going to sit before Councillor Osborne, but then worked out he was also busy, but we hadn't put him in as a sub, so he's apologised for a meeting that he's not.
Okay, all right.
But we worked it out in the end.
You sorted it out between you. Thank you very much. Item 3, disclosable pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests. Nothing there, thank you. If you manage to, if something occurs, please speak up as we go through the meeting. Minutes of the item 4, minutes of the meeting of the subcommittee held on the 27th of June. And there's a movement, Councillor Jarvis moved it, who seconded it? Thank you, Councillor. Want to sign that now? Okay. Thank you very much for that. Can we, do we all agree? Vote in favour of that. Thank you very much. That's okay. Public participation. They're all queuing up at the moment, waiting to get in. So we'll move on from public participation, if that's okay. Thank you very much. And items for discussion, the community safety partnership, which is item 6, North Warwickshire Community Safety Partnership update. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think everybody should have received a copy of the report, so I won't go through it in minute detail, but I just want to highlight a few things. So just on page 7, paragraph 3.9, in terms of our priorities, the North Warwickshire Community Safety Partnership priorities, we work with Warwickshire County Council, and they have a process called the Strategic Assessment. They have just during October and November gone through what they call more scoring process, and they've held 4 sessions, and they're set out on in paragraph 3.9. So there's been a few sessions on serious organised crime, knife crime, business crime. That was one session. The second session was around violence against women and girls. The third session was around exploitation, county lines, substance misuse, and the fourth session has been around antisocial behaviour. Now, what's going to happen in terms of that work is that will now be reviewed and an analysis undertaken to basically inform any new or emerging priorities going forward.
I think, Chair, it mentions several times in here knives, and looking only in the last 24 hours on the police Facebook page, they've got knife amnesty boxes in Neaton and Leamington. When are we having something in North Warwickshire? Because, you know, we do exist up here, even though they seem to think that, you know, when you go up here, there is nothing. But say it's down in Leamington and Nuneaton, and they're amnesty boxes where you can put any weapon, knives, weapons in, and that's it. They're off the streets. We need something in this area.
Would you like to speak, Mark?
I was just going to say on the subject of knife crime, I find it quite disconcerting and horrifying to read certain schools that have been highlighted to have a knife problem, one of them being a primary school. A primary school, that's what, 11 and younger?
That's under 11.
That's
Check.
frightening.
Can I just come in on that? One of the things I think that we need to be aware of, and when it's recorded, sometimes it's recorded as a weapon, and that doesn't necessarily, I'm not saying it's not, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a knife. It's something that could harm somebody else. So it is a concern in this area in terms of the scores, because it was all four out of the 5 secondary schools and 1 primary school. So you are absolutely right, and it is something that we are looking at. In terms of a box, I can certainly raise that with the inspector and talk to them about that. In terms of our performance this quarter, we've only had 1 incident with somebody with a with a knife. Again, that's one too many, but just to put it into some kind of perspective in terms of what we're looking at, it doesn't mean they're not there, and it doesn't mean they're not happening, because I think when we look at violent crime, 50% is in a public place and 50% of it takes place at home, where knives are readily available.
The one key thing is, don't forget North Warwickshire, because we just seem to be another area that's forgotten.
Can I just ask a question about, sorry Jodie, before,
Sorry.
is that, I mean, we mentioned this earlier, is that because they're both, are they at the police stations, or can they be an area that, you know, if you're going to have an amnesty for knives, you don't want anybody to steal them because they're just abandoned in a dustbin in the high street, do you? What we need is, but if it's at Leamington Police Station or where was the other one you said? Nuneaton Police Station. We need to ask that question about here. And Jodie.
It's just kind of while we're on knives, I had a bit of concern that when we're discussing knife crime, that we're missing some of the focus, because it seems to suggest that although we'd only had one knife, we had other weapons. And it's where that definition, because we've all seen the horrific videos on social media in Nuneaton and in Camp Hill, you know, literally on our borders, if not crossing over our borders, of people with machete-like things. You know, do they count? Is that, you know, so although obviously we need to have focus on knife crime, we don't want to make sure that we're saying, well, you know, that doesn't count as knife crime because he's got a machete, because that would be a ludicrous situation to be in. I obviously agree and support the operations being brought here, especially as an identified need. And I was a little frustrated because this is the second time that we've had the report about the secondary schools kind of brought this in the same reviewable document, isn't it? And the numbers are still there. I'm assuming they are the old numbers as of last time as well. There haven't been any future cases. So I think that's worth highlighting as well, that if there haven't been any more future cases, that needs to be pertinent information. I think that although we are seeing the kind of the operations that are happening, we get a list of the operations, we've got no real impact. You know, we don't understand the impacts, I think, all the way through the report, because everything we do in education is about your intent, what you want to do, your implication and the impact it's had, or your predicted impact, and then the actual outcomes. And we're not seeing the impact. All we see is next month's schools or next quarter's schools. You know, we're not actually seeing, I think the nearest we've got to impact, especially on the knife crime, is kind of seeing like the overflows to whether or not it's going up or down. And at the moment it seems to be, knife crime itself seems to be going down, but weapons seems to be going up. And I don't think we're getting a clear picture of what's actually happening with that and the impact of the operations that are happening.
Thank you. Sorry, Terry.
Sorry, I would just like to say that in Harts Hill School, the PCSO, Ellen Jenkins, is attending there on a weekly basis for confidential meetings with the children, and she has hopefully been able to turn around the issues they're having at the school. And because she's going there regularly, I just want to say she's doing a fantastic job. And it's a hard job because sometimes she just gets put in a little room and nobody knows she's there. We're trying to get her into an assembly so that she's up front. Now, I don't know if anything like that is going on in any of the other schools that are having issues. I mean, obviously primary schools is a real shock, but I mean, to raise a question would be, that probably wasn't a knife, but was that just something they picked up in the playground? My concern, choosing to pick up a weapon, be a stick or a stone.
Margaret.
Thanks, yeah. I mean, really, I'm following both Jodie and Kerry here. Knives particularly, but I have to say, obviously I'm not usually on this committee, so I've read this report and I was sort of screaming all the way through, and so what are we going to do about it? And so there was an awful lot of analysis and a lot of data. Do we actually know what works? Do we know? Talking about knife crime, it applies to lots of things in here. So Kerry's mentioned something that's happening at Harsel School, and I know they're doing a lot of work. I'm yet to see whether the data improves, to be honest. But anyway, so do we know what's happened in other areas to reduce? Because the trouble with knife crime is it escalates because people carry knives because other people have got knives and they feel they've got to have them. So what works elsewhere? Are we actually doing anything that works?
Chair, just to come back on that. I mean, in terms of this work, it's a difficult one because we're not naturally the lead in terms of Hartshill School. The lead is Warwickshire County Council in terms of the mentoring project, which is we part fund. And all I can talk about is, you know, in terms of the issues that were raised and then how we responded to that and what we're doing. And I believe that we had a period of time when we were struggling in actually delivering some of that content within Hartshill School because of changes within the kind of senior leadership team within the school. There was a lot of changes, and I believe that's got back on track again recently. And it is contained in my report in terms of actually looking at Hartshill School, and the other school that we're particularly concerned about at the moment is Kingsbury. There is drop-ins from the police, both at Kingsbury and Hartshill. There is consequences of choice programme being delivered at both schools. There is also Aspiring Arts have also got a programme going in. And so it is tackling the education, but it's a changing landscape, and some of those young people become excluded. And one of the issues that we are aware of, and that's where we're seeing those figures, is when they're being excluded. The reason for them being excluded is because they've had a weapon of some kind, and the issue then is they sometimes go off the radar because they then become, in some circumstances, homeschooled, and therefore they're not linked with an agency, and there is no agency specifically working with them. And this is something that we have just picked up upon. So the inspector, Alison Wiggins, is working with Warwickshire County Council at the moment, and I can't think of it, somebody Brooks at Warwickshire County Council, and they're very much looking at those kind of issues as well. So we are trying to take a holistic approach, but I understand what you're saying. It's just the landscape changes. We also know in Kingsbury that quite a number of the people are coming in from outside the area as far as Kidderminster. So it's not, we're not actually dealing with all people who live, reside or go to school in
Can I just ask, if you're talking about people coming in from Kidderminster, they are affecting what's happening in the school. Is that all county line stuff then?
So in terms of that, they're with some young people in and around the Kingsbury area, and we're trying to understand what's going on there. So targeted youth are out walking between Jubilee Court and the park. They're trying to engage. The police have been out. It becomes a different feel when the police are there, because obviously targeted youth can go with a hot chocolate and a warm bus and a more informal kind of open doors kind of.
And it's that sort of patrolling or activity by the police that's identifying the fact that somebody's come all the way from Kidderminster to be a pain in the backside.
But the one thing that I think I need to reassure people is that where we can make a difference, and where these young people, parents are council tenants, we always take action. We always will send a community protection warning to inform them that, you know, in breach of their tenancy if the behaviour continues.
Oh,
No, it's all right.
Has anybody from county council on the board of governors, are they in there? Is the county council aware what's going on? Are they actively participating from the other situation? Or is it arm's length? It's just asking the police to sort of feed back?
To be honest, in both Kingsbury and Hartsfield, there's multi-agencies, you know, school leadership team. I would imagine governors. I'm not engaged physically.
Yeah. There wouldn't be an LEA.
Jodie, you want to say?
I know anecdotally people in my community that have been excluded from school, that have had nothing, no support at all for several years. Some of them, you know, I met a young man at a youth group several years ago who quite blatantly says, "I haven't been to school or had any education in 3 years." Quite openly, and there was nothing that could be done. And I've got a case at the moment where they've actually been involved in a violent incident, and the police still haven't, you know, taken a statement, and it's about 12 weeks. let alone supporting them and stopping them potentially doing it again, or, these things, breaking those cycles. The support isn't getting to these children when they are suspended. And I also know that out of those, I know people who have been at some of these schools with a weapon and have got other children who have told me that that person did this, and they haven't been suspended or excluded. They're in school the next day, much to the disgust of parents. And there is a breakdown in this system that we're not protecting any of the children or the schools and teachers. We've got children doing this in school, and as you say, the danger with knife crime is that people carry because others are doing it, and they feel they have to protect themselves, and that's the escalation that we're going to be seeing if we can't get hold of this. And I think the situations in Camp Hill, have escalated this situation already, and there has been a strong response to this situation in Camp Hill, but the warning signs have been there a long time before. This build-up in, antisocial behaviour in Ansicoma and in Hartshill and on those borders has been there a long time. In Arley, we get a lot of the Camp Hill overflows because there's links between families in Arley and Camp Hill. And it was left to get to a crisis point where there was a real danger to the children involved in that fight before anything was done. And it's really, really concerning. As Margaret says, we've got all this staff monitoring, and it's almost like we're just sitting here watching it happen, and nothing's actually happening. We've got no impact.
Right.
Can I just come back on that one? So, I mean, it's covered in a bit further in my report, but I think what I can do, particularly like for the Hartshill project, I can speak to Jonathan Toy and ask for some outcomes in terms of the current position, in terms of how many people they're working with, who they follow through, what referrals have been made, what, just get a better picture in terms of that, work. Because I think in terms of Kingsbury, which is the other area, that's really only started in September. I can certainly follow up on that. But certainly Hartshill's been running now for a fair few months, if not 12 months. So I can get a clearer picture about that project.
Can I ask you, if I may, Julia? Sarah Parker produces all this data. Is she just crunching numbers, or has she got intelligence? If she was here, could she explain all these tables, or would it just be number crunching and she's putting the data together? Or would I need, because I believe we should have Alison Wiggins here. The biggest problem with that little piece about knife crime, and there's probably 40 different elements of crime throughout this report, it's just taken 22 minutes.
Yeah.
And we've covered one small element. And it needs discussing, and we need to make it, be robust about it. But we can't put 22 minutes to every single item in that page. If we could get Alison to come here and to speak to us, we'd also need to be focused where we need to do it, because the last thing we'd want to do is 22 minutes on each element that she would be doing. So we need to focus. So is it worth asking to get her to do a presentation to us? Because, and I'm just looking at, antisocial behaviour, and I could keep working my way through it. Perception of crime. I was going to actually ask, and we spoke about it in our room earlier. We get to the stage now, LEDs are out there, the cost is reduced. Should we go back to getting the lights put on?
Yeah.
I don't know whether Margaret can come back and tell us how successful it's been up in Hartshill, but as a trial, it's gone. We've got the rest of the winter before it finishes now, I know, but instead of saving 585,000, which is what they claim, will it only cost us 50 net grand now that it's going to be LEDs? And will it be
£3 or
put on?
£4 grand for Hartshill. I mean, and the parish council paid for it, because there's such a strong feeling. And I've actually got through to the county at last that we are slightly different from some areas of the county, not just Hartshill, but lots of other places in North Warwickshire, in that we've got lots of people that work shifts, and they're coming and going when there's no lights at all. They're entitled to the same amenity as everybody else. And I think the county have suddenly got it, because I did hear them say, because we were talking about even reducing the hours that the lights were on for the second. And Izzy Second said, but possibly not in the north because they do a lot of work. So we've got one point across. I have no idea whether it's reduced crime. I don't think you can tell. I'm just so exasperated by crime figures because they've changed the way collect them every year, so you can't compare one year to the next. All I can say is that people feel better because the lights are on. So that's all. And all the police officers I've spoken to, you shouldn't say it's including Alison, say, of course we want the lights up. It's the very senior police officers that.
So we should go back then to push that. I mean, I was looking at this as well. I'm having to go at Alison here at the moment. Problem-solving meetings. She holds do you go to those problem-solving meetings? Because I've never been invited.
I do go to the problem-solving meeting.
Are they? Do we get results of, because one thing that Marion will always say to me, no good talking about it, you need an outcome. And we need an outcome, not just to have a problem-solving meeting. If we're just going to talk about it, we need something to come out. So, what comes out of the problem-solving meeting?
So the problem-solving meetings, basically, it's based on statistical information on a monthly basis prepared by Sarah and the police. And the purpose of that is literally just reviewing the data, making sure that we are addressing the key priorities and putting in place a problem-solving plan where one's needed. So it's not, they don't necessarily, for all issues that come up, it's not necessarily a problem-solving plan is created, but where an issue is ongoing, or they need to resolve it or find a solution. Because sometimes, although sometimes we'll look at some of the statistics and it's so varied and so I'm trying to think of like a time, so with fly tipping, it can be all over the place. The same with vehicle climate times, it can be all over the place. There's no pattern, there's no reason, there's no trend. And then that's very difficult then to do targeted or try and find a targeted solution for that. So what we tend to do is look at analysis, look at the issues, and then look at what we need to do. And so the problem solving and antisocial behaviour meetings are held monthly to basically look at statistics and identify solutions where they can be found.
Okay, Margaret.
Yeah, so there's two sides to this. Obviously, prevention is much better than crimes happening, and I know the police try and do prevention. As you say, when it's sort of random, that's very difficult. What I'd like to see is what happens when a crime has actually happened. Do they have the data? Have we actually caught anybody? What have we done to try and find somebody that's doing this? And my experience, sorry, the police is, unless you have done your own research and can present them with all the evidence, they just say there's no evidence, so they can't do anything. I thought it was their job to get the evidence. So if they looked at what their response has been to crime, that would be a very interesting other side, apart from the prevention. Prevention is important, but what's their response? And if the response was better, the crime would go down. It's simple, and it doesn't happen.
You want to speak on that, or?
Yeah, I can come back on that. I mean, the only things that I can say is in terms of, for example, just one simple example is that we've done a lot of prevention work since I've been in post around, we had a huge issue around sheds being broken into. And so we've done quite in targeted locations. We've provided information, advice and equipment to address shed crimes. And our shed crime numbers have gone down. Now, I know that's,
What about the criminals?
I know, but it's about, I think it's.
You got a big shed, be careful.
Oh, that's already grown.
But again, then if we look at fly tipping, I can only talk about the things that I'm involved with, but if you look again at the fly tipping, again, it's been about gathering evidence, and it's been, it's one of these learning things. So in terms of Streetscape are absolutely brilliant at going out, removing the waste and improving that environment. But there has been a bit of internal training between Streetscape and Environmental Health talking about, well, actually, we need to capture evidence and we need it in a certain way so that we can actually make prosecutions. And so, again, we've been doing some of that, and now we're starting to see those prosecutions, those interviews taking place, those prosecutions taking place. So, and we are getting people, and that's something that's within our control. I can't always talk on behalf of the police. I can only talk about the things that we're physically in control of. But it's a difficult one in terms of, I know there's issues around patrolling, I know there's issues around police numbers, but we can only look at the issues that we're dealing with now. So like, for example, vehicle crimes, a massive issue. It was emerging trend probably when we last met. It's now an issue across the whole of the county. And we're doing quite a lot of work. So a hotspot, Station Road in Coleshill. So we're doing an early morning slot 7 till 9, and then we're going to do an evening slot down there. Where cars are literally their bumpers are being taken off, their lights are being stolen, their bonnets are being taken, they're being broken into. So they're calling these car cannibals. But again, we are trying to get on top of that through, information, advice. It's difficult, patterns change, and we're just trying to deal with those changing landscapes and where we can provide information, support, prevention, advice, equipment.
Okay.
So the weirdest thing is on the North Kingston Warwickshire Police website, it says to park your car underneath a lamppost. So it isn't on. And so that
Don't
leads
live in Maxstoke.
So we're having a lot of number plates stolen, and a lot of them happen on streets with lights off around about 3 a.m. And that's when a lot of our vehicle crimes happening around 3 a.m. when the lights go out, and a lot of the van break-ins happening on Johnson Street, Smith Street, and all the streets where the lights are out. So it's very clear to me, just looking, I've got 4 van break-ins here, 3 in October, the van stolen twice. So they got the van back and it's stolen again. It seems to happen around about the time when the lights are off.
Well, okay.
But
I think this committee, we're going to ask them to do something about that, and I would hope every way we can talk to them. And let's face it, in the north at the moment, we've got 7 county councils as well, that we can put pressure on for that. But I think it may be time to, especially if the costs have completely changed. Something else that I was going to bring up, it was safer streets. One of the issues that was there's lots of funding, this is the Safer Street Fund enables the PCCs and local authorities to bid for investments. Have we bid? I mean, this one is talks about 249,000 spent in March 22. Round 4 and 5 talks about 50 million becoming available for projects. Not 50 million for Warwickshire, 50 million nationwide, but it means there's money there. How do we know that we bid for some of that and actually made it work?
Yeah, Chair, if I can just come in there. So in round 3, we applied for CCTV for Meadow Street Gardens. In round 4, we didn't meet the criteria, didn't really work for us in the north. But I've written down 4 and 5. In terms of 5 hasn't been released yet, but the idea is that I've been having a look at the CCTV. So we've got 27 cameras within North Warwickshire. I've been having a look at, how old they are, their capabilities, things that we can improve, the monitoring of them, and those kind of things. So that the idea is that if and when, and I believe it will happen, when Safer Streets 5 gets announced, so we'll be in a better position to look at what the issues are in North Warwickshire in terms of safer streets, and also look at our CCTV issues. Other things that we could possibly think about is, again, drones, and we could also think about mobile CCTV as well. So I'm just trying to get ahead of the game in terms of having ideas about what's needed in North Warwickshire before the actual funding gets released.
Can I come back to see when you talk about the CCTV belongs to us, North Warwickshire.
Definitely cameras do, yeah.
So the fact there's 15 down in Coles, in parts of Coles, there's not as many as that. So I think there's 15 in Bolesworth, and there's some more coming up in Wharton. Those are not on our list.
No.
Do we have access to know what they are and where they are?
The police have access. Right. The police do.
Big question. Sorry, Joe. Has it proved benefit to us? So they work, and actually they're reducing crime, or we're having to tread water at least.
Our CCTV cameras. I think it's going to be difficult for me just to give you the evidence, and being fairly new in the role in terms of whether the evidence stacks up. For me, the issue I would say is that we could do a full-time surveillance of those cameras. That's what
that's something totally different.
And that's
that's hundreds of thousands of pounds later.
And because it's reactive, we're only using those cameras in a reactive way in terms of when a crime's occurred, then we're going back and checking for evidence.
All right, Jodie.
just on that, before I get to my point, there's just been some technology which actually identifies when there's a potential conflict on CCTV, so it sets off an alarm. So you don't need to man it permanently, but you do need to have somebody there when it pings. So there's kind of new technologies coming in all the time that might need to be kept under review. I was going to go back to the cross-cutting themes in 3.6 and just kind of alongside what Margaret was saying, the protecting people from harm and tackling county lines, you know, and drug dealing. And some of the people involved in this are really hardcore organised criminals that are very threatening and very imposing. And the first thing that seems to happen when any of our residents encounter these is they're expected to expose themselves and put themselves in more danger by reporting it to the police and having police officers around to their house. And
That is a conundrum though, isn't it? You have to
Understandable.
report sometime, don't you?
yeah, but we used to have systems for anonymous reporting. We used to have information gathering sessions where people could give anonymous information, and those don't seem to be being acted on at the moment. And again, with that kind of building on intelligence, you know, it is, you would hope the police's job that if they've been given reports, whether it's anonymous or not, and whether there's a fully factual formed signed statement to support something, you would surely hope that our police are going to take it seriously and have at least a look into it.
Yeah.
Whereas we seem to have some significant crimes being reported, but because the person involved is not fully equipped or confident to potentially make their own situation vastly worse, that the intimidating people are getting away with it. And I just think there needs to be more protection along these lines so that we can actually see something done.
John,
I'm just going back to the CCTV, as you may or may not be aware, Atherstone Town Council have 20 cameras that are monitored. I'm not going to tell you what hours, but they are monitored, live monitoring, and it's having some good effects. It's not just picking up crime, it's picking up people that, what's the best way of saying it? Fragile people, shall we say?
Vulnerable.
Vulnerable people, that's the word I'm looking for, vulnerable people. So, but we do get a report, it's private and confidential, I'm afraid, but we do get a report from the monitoring officers, and it works. Live monitoring actually works.
Ray, you
It's
put your hand up.
costly, but it works.
I was actually going to say what Chile actually answered it, because I was going to say there is a big difference between proactive and reactive monitoring. I mean, proactive is obviously the way to go. Reactive monitoring is crime's already happening. And as Mark said, the proactive monitoring is proving to work, both in the last lot, I'd reported 2 different incidents that the monitoring people had already picked them up before I got there. And, you know, it works. There was one that it was a drugs deal, and his words were, well, he's on my Christmas card, I know him that well. You know, but I'm watching for them.
Okay, thank you.
And a lot of these cameras can't be proactively monitored, can they? They have to go with the laptops, stand by them and download it, don't they? Which is, we had it down Broadmeadow Drive. Antisocial behaviour down there.
They all got nicked.
And like, no, they didn't get nicked.
Oh,
It's that
Nobody wants to nick them, so
we did have three or four cameras that were stolen.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
but say down Broadmeadow Drive, yes, there's antisocial behaviour going on, but then you have to get a police officer to come down with a laptop, stand underneath it to download it.
Yeah, that's technology moving on though, isn't it? So I understand.
Yeah.
It is.
But I mean, one of the victims of crime in this room at the moment is Richard, because half of his cameras have been nicked, haven't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Got GPS trackers.
Well, I could keep going on forever about these. One, I was anything about antisocial behaviour. That becomes a nuisance to everybody. I mean, and I've read some bits and pieces here about the PCSOs doing stuff at garden centres, bits and pieces, and outside the schools, etc. But it's when the PCSO is not there that you get the happen. It might change now. The weather's actually it's quite mild, isn't it? So it's still going to be out in the evening. But once the weather changes, I know it eases off. But I just wonder what initiatives, and I don't know if you've got anything you can add to that.
Yeah, Chair, just to come in there. I mean, I think I think one of the things I do want to say is, on a positive note, actually antisocial behaviour is going down at the moment. So we've just had our antisocial behaviour meeting, and the numbers reported into the police and the instances that have been investigated in the last month have gone down considerably in 3 of the 4 areas across North Warwickshire. And in terms of the interventions that we have in place as well, they've either stayed the same or they've gone down again this month. So, I mean, whilst we have got issues, actually we are tackling antisocial behaviour, and we are seeing that a positive trend this month. I think what we will see, unfortunately, was as we go up to Christmas, we might see things change, and we do tend to see that as a seasonal trend anyway. I think we've covered quite a number of the pieces of work that we're doing at the moment around antisocial behaviour. So a lot of all the school work in Hartshill and Kingsbury, there's quite a lot of work going on there, and it's covered in the report. There's also been Antisocial Behaviour Week, which we've done some campaigns. We've had some events across the county also to look at our powers and how we can better use powers and interventions and tools to get on top of some of these issues. And that was well represented by the police, actually, in terms of getting quite a good police presence, as well as kind of organisations across Warwickshire there. So we've done some of that. I know wherever there is at the moment an issue, so like around vehicle crime, they're upping the patrols in those areas, particularly at targeting particular times when they know these things are taking place. I mean, the one thing that I guess that I will mention is an issue around kind of crime and Crawley services, which is around the HGVs. That is a really difficult one that we're trying to get on top of. So we've just done an engagement with them there, trying to look at signage, trying to look at CCTV. But a lot of the HGV at night times are getting their curtains slashed and on the sides of the lorries, and therefore we've got ongoing conversations with the management at Crawley Services.
Can I just cut across here? We went through an argument in planning about the extension to Crawley Services, and the extension was a secure environment, supposedly. Now, I understand it's serious organised crime feeding out of backs of lorries because they know what they're going after and stuff like that. But do they have their own security on those sites?
So I think the new developments on the northbound of the M6, and I went and had a look actually at that area. It has got 4 CCTV cameras, but two at each end of the actual location. The area that you walk through, there's no CCTV cameras there. And that was one thing that we raised. The old lorry park has no CCTV cameras, and on the south side there is no CCTV cameras, and they're not looking to do anything about that.
Okay, because the one issue about that is 150 lorries parked up. Once they're in between the lorries, they can get on with doing what they like. I do understand.
It was so busy. It was so busy.
Without going, and we could, if you want to speak about more, please do. But we're happy to note this report, because what I want to do is get Alison Wiggins here, and I'd like to both sides to sort it out and have a sort of questions that we want to put to her. Like I say, we can't afford to sit down and have one topic for 20 minutes. We need to work on it. Jodie.
Just on a similar note, looking at the Community Speed Watch, and these are questions that we asked last time, is Community Speed Watch is billed as our most effective tool against speeding, and our KSIs are obviously going through the roof. It's a really personal subject for me. And from this report and from the evidence we've got, Community Speed Watch isn't happening regularly across our borough. And this report kind of details 2 in the last 6 months, and there could be an hour session literally. So we've got, you know, evidence that there's 2 hours of Community Speed Watch happened, and there's a significant amount of investment gone in, partly from the fund of this committee, into those cameras, into the tripods, into the assistance around it, and it just doesn't seem to be consistent enough to be anywhere near effective at doing anything, and we don't seem to have any other tools for coping with.
Well, I agree with you, because I got it wrong the other day. It is 11. They say there's 11 active units. It lists Newton Regis. Newton Regis has just managed to get hold of a gun, but it hasn't had any training yet. They haven't got an officer available to do it. So that's 1 out of 11 that I know. Shuttington had one, but they sold the gun because they didn't have any volunteers, and it's not as active or as vibrant as they say.
No.
Okay.
Through you, Joe, in Atherstone, we've just had the training
Yeah.
for 6 people, and the 6 borough councillors out of their fund, which surprised me when I heard Jodie say that there's been guns bought out of this area that we've had no funding from anywhere, and the 6 borough councillors in Atherstone have all used their fund to buy a gun. We've had the training, we're ready to go out for the first thing. One thing you can't do it covertly. 100 metres before you're doing it, you have to put a sign and say, hang on, there's a speed camera down here, and you don't catch anybody. I mean, and we had a classic one when I live opposite the QE school, and they had the kids out with a gun. The kids said, look up by the grammar school, mister. He said, as soon as they get by the grammar school, you'll see the nose of the car dip. He says, because they see the sign and the brake, and they don't catch anybody.
But it's worked then, because they have slowed down.
Yeah,
They only work while they're there.
yeah.
Okay, anybody got any other questions about this? Oh,
So yeah, just quickly, because I want to wrap up. We mentioned somewhere here about antisocial motorcycling.
yeah.
I mentioned it last week. Last time I met, and one of the residents actually spoke to a motorcyclist in between then and now, and they said they love coming to Woodend because there's no police. Actually, what they said, oh, we love it here because there's no police. There's never any police here. And is there any chance we can get the police out?
Well, I've actually organised this. It's the same group of policemen. They've used all terrain vehicles,
Yeah.
and they use the off-road bikes. They've done Corley Rocks, the common up at Baxley, the back all on the green lanes behind Off Street.
Yeah.
But they've got a better intelligence, the bikers, than the police. Because they'll know they're in Off Street, so they'll go to Baddesley or they'll go to Corley Rocks, and when they go round, it works like that. And unfortunately, it's not big enough. But my suggestion is you put a request in to the sergeant or to Alison Wiggins, and she organised it straight away. It works at its best in the summer. It'll ease off a bit now, although they're still out there. There's no doubt about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I noticed here they were saying about usage for off-road bikes. There's been £15,000 put in towards doing it. Barry.
When we had trouble at Newton Regis, they did support us. They did ask for, if you did see any off-roaders, to take the picture and get in touch with the police. And then what they started to do is the off-roaders did come round and they did start using the bikes in that area. It takes a little while to get going because they're all over the place. But once you've got that connection, they will support you. So just keep on at them, they will support you.
Cody.
Sorry, Chair. Clive, I think this one might be for you. What sort of enforcement powers do we have in prosecutions? Because it's all right coming up with all these rules and procedures and everything as a committee, but if we've got no teeth, if we can't enforce the rules we're coming up with, I'm not talking about laws, I'm talking about the things we're doing. Are they enforceable? Are they something we can recoup some of our expenses on? Are they something we can actually make people feel like they're being watched and being dealt with? Because I think this comes back to what Margaret said earlier. If we're not targeting the offender, it's the victim who has to come up with the evidence to provide to the police. And I just want to know, as a council, what powers we have of enforcement.
Chairman, in terms of offences, generally, criminal offences investigated by the police, the sort of things that have been covered in this report. There's a few things, like obviously it touched on fly tipping, which falls within our domain. There's a few, if you like, ancillary powers that we can sometimes use, such as injunctions, which, you know, obviously depending on what the issue is, we can sometimes use those, and we've used them to, you know, some quite good effect. So it does vary, if you like, depending on the subject matter. But in terms of if we come across evidence of offences which we aren't empowered to prosecute ourselves, then obviously we can pass those on to the police. you know, and pass it on to the police and work with them. But so it will depend on the actual issue at hand, what we can do.
Margaret?
Yes, Chairman. Yeah, I know you don't want to go through everything in this report, but I must take the opportunity to be here to mention killed and serious injuries on the road. I'm sorry, but since I've been a borough councillor for a while now, this has been, North Warwickshire is the worst in the county by far, and one of the worst in the country. What is doing, and I see it's even getting even worse by these statistics we've got in front of us. And it isn't the motorways. It's our small rural roads and our dangerous junctions. Who is doing what about it? Now, I know it's not the borough council that's responsible for most of that, but if we're going to report on it, we need to be able to do something about it. And it's never changed apart from to get worse. Since I've been on the borough, it's never changed apart from to get worse. And it really is difficult. I mean, I've got a difficult junction right near my house. And I think nearly one a month we have an accident, and some of them are fatal. It's just ridiculous. So what are we doing? Is there an action plan behind that?
Check that in there. So yeah, there's Warwickshire Road Safety Team, and it's chaired by Chris Lewis, from Police and Crime Commissioner, and the Police and Crime Commissioner have a commitment against the KSIs as well, in terms of their target is to reduce KSIs by 50% across the county. There's a whole package from dashboards and reporting and all of that. But I am with you in terms of when I first started this role, I picked up about, I think we have 2 or 3 of the worst junctions across Warwickshire.
We have 5.
5 of the worst of the top 10.
Yeah.
5 out of the top 10. And I know I didn't get anywhere with my conversations around like what would be done about it. How can we improve that safety? I mean, I have been in this job nearly 12 months, so I think it's time to pick up that conversation again.
Can I make inequalities bit? Because you just said that they're looking to improve the situation across the county. Well, of course we argue against that. But they should be targeting their resource where it's worse. And it's worst in North Warwickshire.
Yeah.
Target the resources where it's worse, and at least have a target to get North Warwickshire down to the county average. Let's do that as a first step. And then we can get the county average down. Well, it will come down if this comes down. So, that's what we need to do.
Can I just say that the last time we had the PCC, which was only a few weeks ago, the same question, you could reduce it by 50%. My question to him is, what are you going to do about it? Talk about postcode. Since that meeting, 2 people have been killed in North Warwickshire. So it hasn't happened. And I know it can go on up and down. There's no point having an aspiration without some method of doing it. The aspiration is wonderful, but you've got to be able to do something about it. Any other questions about it, Jodie?
Sorry, you mentioned about the safer streets. When we filled in the safer streets consultation, we were assured that there would be time and experts to come and look at our communities and our concerns. And that seems to have gone very quiet. I'd like to know if there's going to be an update on it, and people to actually, we were told that engineers would come around and look at the dodgy points and see what practical implications. Because obviously the Arley backs, there was a rape down there recently, and are hotspots for drug crime and nitrous oxide and things, unlit and unloved.
We put that down as a tar. The only one that and because he's here at the moment, during COVID, we complained about fly tipping, people coming in from the outside. It seems worse to me in terms of anecdotal evidence that's sent to me. People phone up, and we see it ourselves. Is it getting worse?
That shall come on to that, Chair, in the next item on the agenda.
Okay. All right, we'll move. Any other questions about that? So we have some. I've got here that safer streets. We're going to look into that. Something about KCIs. Is it worth having Sarah Parker, or can we get the inspector here to actually do that? And at that stage, I think we make sure that we have the right questions to ask. Can't ask about everything in general, but the ones that really matter to us. So based on that, can I move from the chair that we note the report? Is that how it's written? I can't remember. Members consider to update the identity any areas for further scrutiny and consideration, and that members note progress of the North Warwickshire Community Partnership. Are you happy to abide by those two suggestions? Would you like to change? All right, I've moved it from the chair. Can we second that? Councillor Phillips. All those in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Move on to the next. When you say that, I haven't got it in my agenda.
I just think so. I haven't got it.
I haven't got anything.
Panicking looking through it.
It's a verbal report.
It's a verbal update.
Okay,
If you
thank
so
you.
wish. Yeah.
Oh, well, we definitely wish.
Thank you very much. No, I was hoping so. So yeah, so I'll pick on a couple of things that I've already mentioned. I just want to finish off with hopefully something, a tool that will be useful for members to use in the future when we're looking at flighting, particularly comparing areas and types of flighting, but I'll move on to that in a minute. So I think one of the things that we mentioned was cameras. And I think it's been mentioned previously that the Police and Crime Commissioner has given us a grant for us to look at a different type of camera, because I've reported previously to this committee that we have struggled with cameras in the past. We deploy them a lot. We use trail cameras of various sorts, and although they can be successful in capturing evidence, very low hit rate for an awful lot of effort, it has to be said. So Police and Crime Commissioner has funded us to get a couple of cameras equipped with AI. A little bit, I think Councillor Gosling was mentioning that you know, the town centre monitoring kit, the CCTV, you've got AI on them now. These are similar, but they're specifically for flight tipping offences. So as you can imagine, when we put cameras out in rural locations, and a bit like Councillor John was saying, we go and download them. You know, you can get them to report live, but you need power nearby, and those tend to be in areas where you don't get an awful lot of light. So they tend to be deployed in areas where your mobile signal's not good, and you know, you've got a power supply, so you have to go out and retrieve the data and look through it. And we spend many an hour looking through stuff and not much in the way of evidence to lead to prosecutions. What these cameras will do is that they will only pick up those incidents which looks like a flight tip, so they won't bother recording and alerting you to the fact that the badger has wandered across in front of the camera, or that there's somebody cycling past, or somebody out for a ramp, or whatever. So they will only look at stuff that is criminal behaviour. So it isn't necessarily just flight tipping, but criminal behaviour. So those are on order, and obviously as soon as they've been deployed, I can't tell you where they're going to deploy. Well, not in an open meeting anyway, but as soon as they're deployed, we'll let members know about that. And hopefully when we come back to the next meeting, this committee will be able to give you an update on how successful those have been once they've been deployed. So hopefully that's a bit of the technology we've talked about that will go into operation certainly to try and tackle flight tipping in the borough. I want to just briefly mention Operation Merge, which some of you may or may not be aware of, but Operation Merge took place towards the end of September. And it was a joint operation between ourselves, our environmental health streetscape teams, and our comms teams, and the rural crime team, the police, and the Environment Agency. It was specifically to tackle fly tipping, but it did a few things. So there was a social media campaign, quite a lot of comms and community engagement around fly tipping, road traders, waste carriers, that sort of thing. Our environmental health team and the rural crime team jointly visited 23 local garages to talk to them and to check with them how they dispose of their tyres, because members of this committee will be aware that fly tipping tyres is a perennial problem for us. So that was good work carried out. And they also stopped a number of waste carriers to check their licences, and 2 of those were found to not have the correct waste carriers licences, and the police are now dealing with those by way of prosecution. So that was some good work, and Julie, I think we're going to try and replicate that sort of thing again in the future. And in the past, we've had people like DFT involved as well, who have looked at the roadworthiness of vehicles as well, and stopped and searched vehicles on that basis. So that was quite a good piece of work that was carried out as a joint exercise, and those sorts of things are always good. So the third thing I want to mention, and I'm hoping that the technology works. If it doesn't, what I say to you won't make an awful lot of sense. So hopefully this will appear on the screen. So in the past, you'll have had a report from me or from others that have said, you know, there's been this many fly tips of this type since the last time we reported anything. What we intend to do, if members think this will be useful, is send the link out to this dashboard, which is a reporting tool for members to interrogate themselves, to be able to see exactly what's going on throughout the borough, throughout their patch, by date range and all the rest of it. So this is designed to be an interactive tool. So for example, that's giving us all the fly tips for last couple of years. If you go back a year further, it will give you a comparison against 2020, 2021 and 2022. You'll see that there's been a fall in fly tipping over that time. To answer one of the questions, of course, 2022 is not completed yet. But it will allow you to zone in on your pack, zone in your type of way. So if you want to know how many tyres, for example, we've mentioned that before, have been fly tipped, it will tell you that. If you want to look at it in a particular year, it'll only give you those hotspots that appear where tyres have been dumped on that interactive map on the left-hand side. And any number of hopefully useful pieces of data for members to have a look at. And you'll be able to access this. Once it's finished, it's in its development stage at the moment, you'll be able to access this any time. So you won't need to wait for me to tell you about it. You can have a look at this any time and look at your own patches, for example. You know, if you want to zoom in and look at what a particular incident was, there you go, it'll tell you exactly what was dumped, where it was dumped, and how big the size of it was. So hopefully this will be a better, more intuitive, more interactive way of reporting fly tipping information to you in the future, if that's something that members.
I noticed there on that one with the green waste, you said highway land. Would it report if it is in Farmer Bloggs' land? Farmer Bloggs, should I say? We
don't report fly tips that are not on our land.
Right,
so what we do is prosecute them, because the second tab, there's not so much data on this at the moment, but it will tell you the number of reports we've had of fly tipping, number of prosecutions currently in investigations currently in place and prosecutions, and that will be a mixture of highways fly tipping and fly tipping that's taking place on public land.
Okay. So do you have a count for that?
Environmental Health will keep a record of ones that have been reported to them from a prosecution investigation point of view. The Rural Crime Team will also have a report of the ones that have been, but they're not routinely reported to us unless.
So it could be 2 or 3 times bigger or less?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think anecdotally, our records say that about 90% of fly tips reported are on public land.
Okay.
I think actually the figure is nearer a third to 2/3, so a third on private land and 2/3 on public land, or maybe even higher. In some areas it's 50-50.
Okay.
But we don't hear about them on the whole.
Anybody got any questions? I knew you'd have one.
We've been made concerned recently about whether things reported are being logged correctly,
Yep.
or where there seems to be a breakdown, I think is probably the best way to say it. So the high profile one that was caught on CCTV camera with the transit van, I know I spoke to Sally and she said it wasn't reported properly, and I actually know the gentleman involved that caught the video, who says I phoned it in on the day, I sent them the video, I filled in an online form, and yet there was a delay, and from his point of view, it was only when it hit 1 million on Twitter that all of a sudden people were interested. And I'm like, I'm absolutely sure that's not true, but it's quite hard to contest that, because as soon as it hit 1 million on Twitter, he had the police phoning him to say, can we deal with this? Whereas he's reportedly been told that it wasn't a police business previous to that. So have we got a disconnect between what we believe is reportable and what the police can deal with? Where's this breakdown happening?
Well, so first thing I'd say is if anybody's got any evidence of fly tipping reported to us, the Borough Council will deal with fly tipping, and we will investigate fly tipping. So we will call on the police for assistance, but we have the powers to investigate fly tipping and prosecute fly tipping, and that's something that we do. If the report comes to us in the first instance, there's probably more chance that we'll deal with lower scale fly tipping incidents than if it's reported initially to the police, although obviously I can't speak for the police's response on this, but I know that we will respond. We have had resourcing issues in environmental health, and I've spoken about that in this committee, but that situation has improved significantly. And in fact, the fact that we've got, I think it's, so there are 36 current investigations, which is higher than we've had at any time previously. And we're starting to see a couple of successful prosecutions going through the courts now as well, and we just haven't had the resource available to deal with that. So I think part of that disconnect is the fact that it's happened over a period where we've not been able to respond as quickly as we would like. And what I would say is we are now out of that period and very much trying to catch up not only on the backlog that we've had post-COVID, but also through our resource issues. And we're now more quickly picking up those that are reported to us and dealing with them far more promptly than we have previously. And we're getting the tools that we need to tackle it. So he was talking about the fact that we're more better training in-house in terms of what evidence looks like, how you need to capture it, how you need to preserve it, how you need to report it. Our own interviewing technology we've improved, so PACE interviews and interviews under caution are being done more effectively than they have been previously, because we've now got the right equipment to deal with those. We've got more staff trained to do that sort of thing. We're renewing our sort of partnerships with the Rural Crime Team. And in fact, there are more rural crime officers dedicated to fly tipping in theory than there ever have been. Choose your words carefully, Dobbs. Than there have been, and those, but they are working more closely with our team, I think, than they have done previously, which is good, and we need more of that. And one of the communications things we were trying to do, and you pointed out, fly tips on private land, is that we, even though we cannot remove them, we are keen to hear about them. So that we can investigate them and prosecute, because we've got the capacity to deal with it now. So I think all those things are moving in the right direction. We're also hoping that the new cameras we deploy, if they prove to be successful, will free up more officer time to deal successfully and effectively with fly tipping, and get more of that information through to our environmental health team and our legal team so they can prosecute them more quickly. And we need to use our fixed penalty notices. Now we've got them, those at the maximum level as well. But again, it requires evidence to be able to do that. And now our street cleaning teams are preserving more evidence more effectively. We're able to do more of that sort of work as well. So hopefully those are all things that are moving in the right direction. And the next time I come to see you, or you look at this online in the privacy of your own home, you'll be able to see that some of those things are moving in the right direction.
Right.
In the past 2-3 weeks, we've had 2 motorcycles burnt out and the footpath at the side of the bypass.
Yeah.
I've reported both to the police, and the police then report both to Streetscape to move them. I reported it to the police on the basis of vehicle crime, because obviously they've been nicked, they've been thrashed around, and they've been burnt out. Now, all motorcycle frames have got an indelible number stamped into them. Now, the police are saying, well, we can't identify who it is. So some poor sod has had their bike nicked, burnt out, and that crime will never be completed because the police haven't looked at the remnants of the frame and said, oh, its number is so-and-so, DVLA, what's this? Oh, it's Joe Bloggs down the road. He's reported it stolen. We found it burnt out. Job's complete. Why is it being passed to Streetscape? And is it something that Streetscape should be saying to the police? Your problem, not ours. Because the last one, the police reported, well, asked me who to report it to. So I gave them Lorna's contact details. Lorna raised a job card for the guys to go out to move it. It's too heavy for the guys to move it, so they've got to get contractors now to go and shift it. Well, my understanding was that vehicle crimes were recovered by the police. As you see, you see the cars that, get stuck on the back of a trailer and all the way to usually for Longley Garage, isn't it?
Well, I mean, abandoned vehicles we deal with, don't we? So I think there's that's the disconnect there, to use to borrow another phrase, between whether it's disposed of or it's part of a crime.
Yeah.
and we do deal with abandoned vehicles, and we do deal with fly tipping. And it's an avert out, okay, it's probably falling in the police's eyes into that latter category rather than the former. If there's evidence we can retrieve with it and we can share it with our colleagues in the crime team, then we'll do that, and we'll speak to our crews about doing exactly that. And
The
that's-
motorcycle
I
is
think
still
that's-
down there now.
I know Lorna's struggling to try and get hold of somebody. It's access to it. Of course, you can get a moped to it or a bike to it. You can't get a truck or a trailer to it.
Just as a last point, it appears, I mean, I walked the dog down there, and it appears that it is quite a strong ASB area. I've seen various things down there, and I wouldn't go down at night, put it that way. That it's almost, to me, as they want these paperclip style of gates, just each end. Because if it's going to cost a contractor to go down there and shift it, why not just pay that little bit for the paper clips to stop it happening in the first place? And it's a very, very overgrown area, and I think it's lucky that these fires, and there've been extensive fires, have not been, you know, a couple of matches on the floor. They've been obviously big blazes that they haven't turned out into a lot more, and burnt down a considerable amount of trees, hedgerows, whatever's down there.
We have looked at PSPOs before, haven't we, for gate? Well, we've gated a couple of places, and maybe a PSPO, floodplain protection order or a gating order down there might work.
Yeah.
You've got to
Say, if you've got to spend money on having to shift it, if you could spend the same money on stopping it happening in the first place, is that a wise way?
Okay, moving on. Any other questions, Jodie?
It's just a really quick point. One of our licensed waste removals has got a big sign now on his van that says licensed and his license number. And it's obviously very effective, and we've been promoting it locally. I wondered if there was any scope in having like large yellow stickers or something for licensed waste users to actually put as an advertisement for them. That kind of raises the profile of licensing and shows people quite clearly who is and who isn't.
Yeah, we'd certainly look into that, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions on that? Sorry?
It's got a license in the Nuneaton operating, look what it should.
Yeah, the licenses are
Nationwide.
probably England and Wales,
I see.
but yeah, they'll be nationwide.
So we've got nothing to report, and that was a verbal report, so we've got a verbal nod that we've happy with it. Everybody happy with what we've had so far? Okay, in that case, that's the end of the meeting, unless you've got more questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, more soon.
Yep.